Welcome to this month's State of .NET webinar, the State of DevOps. This month, Marcus is going to focus exclusively on your options for implementing DevOps in your organization. So what is DevOps? It's pretty simple, really. DevOps is about speeding up the delivery of applications and services in a repeatable and reliable fashion using tools and practices. Today, Marcus will share some of those tools and practices with you, so you can make an educated choice on what will work best for you and your team. My name is Jim Duffy, and I'm responsible for the sales and marketing efforts for all of the Code services. Code is so much more than just a magazine. Code Magazine is our flagship, of course, but our other divisions include Code Consulting, where we do custom software development work, Code Training and Mentoring, and Code Staffing. If you're interested in reaching out about any of our Code services, my email is on this slide. If this is your first time attending one of our webinars, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. If you've attended a webinar in the past, welcome back. In addition to Marcus answering questions live, we will have expert members of our Code Consulting team in the chat window to answer your questions. Our sponsor for this webinar is Fortellus. Are you working on an automotive app but need more compelling APIs? Fortellus provides software development APIs for the automotive industry and an automotive industry marketplace for developers to market their products. Fortellus is an open integration platform for automotive dealerships, OEMs, and ISVs. Find the data that moves you. Learn more at fortellus.io. Fotino is an open source project that allows developers to create native cross-platform applications using web development technology. You can leverage your HTML and CSS and JavaScript skills to create apps that run on Windows, Linux, and the Mac. It's like Electron, only smaller and much more lightweight. Learn more at tryfotino.io. If you don't currently subscribe to Code Magazine, we can take care of that. Code Magazine is the leading software development magazine, written by expert developers for developers. As a benefit for attending, all registered attendees will automatically receive a free Code Magazine subscription, provided you don't already subscribe. I've also included a free subscription link for you to freely share with others who couldn't make it to the live webinar. Our presenter today is Marcus Egger. Marcus is the big cheese around here. He's the Code President, Chief Software Architect, Publisher of Code Magazine, International Author and Speaker, Microsoft Regional Director, and all-around nice guy. He'll be ready to start in just a minute. Joining Marcus today is Brian Randell. He's the co-author of Professional ALM with Visual Studio 2013. He co-hosts the DevOps.fm podcast, creates courses for LinkedIn Learning, is a longtime Microsoft MVP Award recipient, and co-chairs the VS Live conference. He's also an experienced consultant, developer, and public speaker. He is skilled in DevOps, surprise, SQL Server, programming in C#, and building cloud applications on Microsoft Azure using Visual Studio, Azure DevOps, and GitHub. Welcome to the State of .NET webinar series, Brian. Our continuing mission is to help people build better software. We are a Microsoft partner, and we build custom software solutions. We modernize legacy applications, and we support and maintain existing applications. Whether it's a cloud-based or an on-prem solution, a web application, a mobile app, or a Windows desktop application, we can help with whatever platform you're targeting. Our team of expert developers and consultants are ready to help you with your project. Our very popular and in-demand free hour of code provides an opportunity for you and or your team to meet with our hand-picked expert team to discuss anything you could use our help with. Software development technologies or platforms, languages or databases, front-end, middle tier or back-end, best practices or architectural design. Schedule your call today and let us help. No charge, no strings, no commitment. Just free help from our code experts. Slots are limited, so reach out to me about getting a free hour of code scheduled for you and your team. If you like what you see today, or have seen in our prior webinars, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. We would like your feedback about this webinar in the form of a quick survey, and we're willing to pay $100 to one lucky winner. The survey is very short, and you'll finish in no time flat. We'll post the survey link in the chat window. It's almost time to turn things over to Marcus and Brian, but before I do, I want to share with you that all the slides and recording of today's webinar will be available on the State of .NET page on the Code website. I've included the link here. Okay, you've heard enough from me. Thanks for listening. Take it away, Marcus and Brian.
Thank you, Jim. Well, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending wherever you are at. Apologies for the slight delay in getting started. I guess now you know that this really is live. We had some slight hiccups this morning with the connection, but hopefully everything should be solved right now. So great to see another great turnout. We have a very interesting topic today. Looking at the agenda here, we got what we typically have for a State of .NET event. We are looking at the state of something. In this case, it's the state of DevOps. It's a very interesting topic, obviously. A lot to talk about. We are talking about the different options you have for DevOps, what you should know, what you should avoid, what's good to use. As always, we're trying to share the experiences we have because we are not just a consulting business, but we are a magazine publisher. We have a lot of community involvement. So for those of you who are new to this event, we always feel that because we sit in the middle of all this, we don't necessarily know everything, but we do hear a lot from people. And we want to share that with you so you know what you should and shouldn't use. Now, this event's going to be a little bit different from what we normally do, because normally it's myself doing the main presentation. And then I have maybe a co-presenter or two. This time, we're actually talking about a topic that I personally am not the expert in. And therefore, I've brought in a co-presenter who's going to take you through most of this presentation. And that's my good friend, Brian Randell. Been known him for a long time, and he is the expert in all things DevOps. So it's going to be great to have him. And in fact, I'm going to switch over.
I'm great, Marcus. Thanks for having me. Sounds good. Well, as Marcus said, good day, good evening, and possibly very good early morning to everybody. As Marcus said, my name is Brian Randell, and I've been doing the DevOps a long time. So we're going to just jump right into this and talk about the state of DevOps, and then we'll look at some demos. About slide you've already kind of seen, but just contact information, etc. The dinosaur, I was playing with PowerPoint and I saw this. I thought, the world has dramatically changed. And thankfully, we don't have T-Rex chasing us. So, COVID's horrible, but just think you don't have a dinosaur chasing you. So let's get right into it, right? The first thing I like to do when I talk about the state of DevOps is, of course, level set on what is DevOps. And the definition I like to use doesn't come from Wikipedia. It comes from a good friend of mine, Donovan Brown, who works at Microsoft. DevOps is the union of people, process, and products. So right there, notice something interesting. And what's particularly telling of this even came from Microsoft, is that it's not about what you buy. It's about who is doing the work. So there's a psychological aspect to this. It's a union of people and then process, and we're not getting caught up in the big P process or big A agile, little a agile, robe and sandals agile. We're focusing on what works for your organization. Now, that said, I'm going to try and talk about some well-known practices that we've learned over the last 10, 15 years of really doing DevOps and how, based upon empirical evidence, it's working. But the bottom line is it's people and process and then good products that enables continuous delivery of value, and value being the key statement there. My guess is none of you want to work for free, right? And it's there's this idea that we're going to work hard and we get paid, but there also should be sometimes this, what I'd call the satisfaction of doing a good job. And that doing a good job is represented by making other people happy. And the way we do this as software developers and software engineers is we deliver value by delivering systems that are available, that are performant, and ultimately do what the user needs them to do. Whether it's a game, whether it's an online shopping experience, or whether it's accounting software, whatever it is. Now, when we think about going into the tech part we need to talk about the psyche first. And when I'm talking psyche, I'm talking about the human soul, mind, or spirit. I mean, the reality is that to be successful, you need to have intellectual buy-in from the humans. And so there's three things that really stand out when it comes to how you start your DevOps journey. The first thing is flow. And we basically want to enable a fast left to right flow from development all the way to operations and to the customer. One of the key tenets of DevOps is breaking down those organizational silos. A big thing we talk about is product ownership, rethinking projects and thinking about having ownership end to end of a software and possibly plus hardware experience. We want fast feedback. We want constant information, both digital telemetry on how our applications are doing, but also to be able to get feedback from users at all stages of the development process, whether it be through, send a smile, send a frown, whether it be emails or be it formal help desk. We want to make sure we're getting fast feedback and able to adapt to the needs of the business. And then we have to have continual learning, right? None of this exists in a vacuum. This is a continual learning process. You're going to hear me say it over and over again that DevOps is a journey. It's not a destination. When we think about the principles of flow, we're really thinking about limiting work in progress. One of the big problems we have in traditional software projects is overscoping work. One of the great things, for example, about agile practices like Scrum is Scrum says, look, set up a time box. In Scrum, the time box is a month or less. Okay. Other teams look at Lean and Kanban. It all comes down to the same thing: eliminating waste and really coming down to these short cycles. Do some work, get feedback, do it again, rinse, repeat. And the reason is it eliminates waste, because if you find that something isn't working the way you want to, you can switch context and go another direction. When we think about limiting work in progress, we want people to focus. Context switching is expensive. Going from meeting to meeting, then actually coding doesn't work very well. What we want to do is have these workflows that are more optimized for rapid development and delivery. When we think about principles of feedback, we want to see the problems as they occur, right? I'm sure a lot of you have seen the studies and the charts about the cost of a bug found in development versus a bug found in production. It's just obvious, right, that fundamentally we want to get that feedback on a regular basis, and then when a problem comes up, we want to be able to swarm and solve that and then build up new knowledge. And ultimately, we want to push quality closer to the source. One of the key things there we're talking about is having developers embrace testing. And I remember years ago I did a talk at Microsoft TechEd. It was I think 2006 in Boston, and I did a talk about Microsoft's team tools that they had created for Visual Studio. And I started talking about unit testing of all things. But in 2006, boy, the audience was unhappy. I got literally tons of markdowns saying, I'm a developer, not a tester. And it's just amazing, the mindset that when we fast forward to 2021, any developer worth their salt is thinking about, how am I going to test this application for repeatability, for quality. And ultimately, we need an organization that supports a high-trust culture of continuous learning. We need to transform those local discoveries into global improvements around our organization and maybe even in the open source community. Right? One of the things we talk about a lot is how organizations need to adopt open source principles inside their organization through what we often talk about as inner source. And ultimately, we're looking to inject resilience patterns into our daily work. Right? How to reduce deployment times, increase test coverage. In other words, continue to optimize the way we build software solutions. Now, that information I got there was just a brief summary out of a great book called the DevOps Handbook, and I highly recommend you read it and you share it with your organization. Now, one of the big things that comes up when I start talking about DevOps, I talk about the 3 ways and people, process, products, is how do we know it works? I mean, I can tell you it's worked for me, but one of the things we often rely upon, and once again, I'll go back to Scrum, is this notion of empiricism, right? Having tried and gotten results. Well, the good news is that people around the industry have thought the same thing, particularly for the last 5 to 10 years, in that they have collected information about how people are doing DevOps. And over the years, they've done these various surveys and analysis of the data. This is data from a report that was done by Dora, which was an independent organization before Google bought them, that was funded by all the big players. This was the key thing. The reports don't cover a product. You won't see GitHub versus AWS versus Google tooling or Microsoft. What they talk about is the prescriptive guidance and things that people are doing to be successful at DevOps. And so from the 2018 report, one of the things that they break down is what they call high and elite or top performers versus low DevOps performers. And what you're seeing here on this chart is time spent. And I don't know about you, but I want to be in that top performing group that's spending 50% of my time on new work. Being creative, building something new is awesome, right? As opposed to finding defects from end users, right? That brings no one joy and satisfaction to get a bug report from a customer, to have them unhappy, and then have to fix it. So what we want to do is see how we can move from possibly low performing up into that top performing bracket. Now, one of the ways that I like to break down DevOps goals and success metrics is to look at a couple things. Number one is agility, and the other is reliability. From an agility perspective, number one, we want to increase deployment frequency. You go into a lot of organizations and you find that their ability to deploy new versions of their software, whether it be desktop applications, server-based applications, mobile, etc., is it can take weeks, if not months. Right? So we want to embrace things like automation. We want to embrace this culture where we reduce the friction from developer to end user. But we also have to be prepared to pivot when the company needs us to. And this means reducing change lead time. How long does it take from request to delivery of the feature? Right? We need to react to the business and be dynamic. You know, if you go back to the 2000s when Steve Jobs stood on stage and held up the phone and introduced the iPhone, and then later they introduced the App Store, people wanted to build iOS apps. The problem is a lot of enterprises, didn't have the expertise, and more importantly, did not have the trust of their internal customers. I can find you article after article from that era where you'd see companies talking about how they had hired out. In fact, a lot of companies that were driving mobile applications at that era was the marketing departments. And so marketing was choosing to go out to their various agencies that they used for marketing and saying, hey, we want to do an app, but we don't trust our internal teams. So if you want to get the good work, you have to be able to meet the business where they're at. Now, ultimately, the other thing about DevOps is building that high trust culture. And as part of building that high trust culture is that we have to understand that we don't want to have bugs. But we also have to have the realities that you're going to screw up. Someone's going to break something. And so the big thing is, reduce the blast area, right? Reduce the impact of any failure, reduce change rate, learn from it, and then reduce the time it takes to detect and repair those changes. And then it's to build a culture of resilience engineering and rethinking how we do it. Root cause analysis doesn't always pan out the way people want it to, right? Because fine, you find the root problem and you go to mitigate it, and so then something new happens. What you want to do is build a system that can live around and work when bad things happen. That's why you see projects like Netflix's Chaos Monkey project, right? The ability to inject chaos into what should be an ordered system. And that's the problem for developers, right? We look at software as a structured and organized thing that we can control. And that's why a lot of developers get into coding, is you feel like you have control. But the reality is software and large-scale systems are going to have problems. The key is be as reliable as possible and continue to improve. Oh, I knew I would say this. It's a journey, not a destination. And that's a key thing. Your progress through DevOps is going to follow a J-curve. This is actually from the 2018 report as well. And what you'll find is as you start to adopt it, you can get some quick wins, automation being a great one. I do this a lot when I go in with customers. We'll do a 2-week engagement where we'll go through and do an analysis of what they're doing, find something that we can get that is a win. And 9 times out of 10, it's optimizing their pipeline approach of how they get code from a developer to a deployable unit. We might not get it into automated production but we can at least get the packages ready, get it into a staging or dev test environment. The problem is, as you go through this, one of the things you'll run into is the technical complexity of doing testing, right? Doing automated testing, shifting testing more onto development, right? Unit testing, as I mentioned, for some people is just, just like writing code, and for other people, there's just an impediment in their mind. Particularly if you're dealing with legacy software that doesn't have a good architecture for componentization, doesn't do things like dependency injection for like web apps, for example. And so those kind of things, coupled with things like technical debt, can really slow things down. So it's basically this relentless quest to improve your process and really try to build centers of excellence around how you build your systems that are critical to understand that DevOps is not something that you just buy in a box, right? And that's why so far I haven't even talked about a product, because this is about people and process first, right? It's about organizational fortitude to stay committed to the road ahead. Now, I mentioned Dora a couple of times. I'm just going to jump out here for a second. And if I go to my documents folder on here, I have a folder. So you can find these using your favorite search engine. There's a 2019 report. These are free. You should take a look at them. There's a lot of good data here. It provides you with that empiricism to provide to management and other people with data to show how the larger scale software development industry worldwide is doing, right? We see here that 50% of the results were from the US, but we got Europe represented. We've got Southeast Asia, South America. We obviously got to get the numbers up in some parts of the world, but the fundamental activities that are going on is that people are embracing DevOps and it's making organizations better. So definitely take a look at that. State of DevOps reports. And there's other ones out there. Puppet Labs has been doing one for years. Theirs is really good. Redgate has one focused on database stuff. And the key thing with a lot of these is that they're not tools. They talk about process, people, how to be better. And then, yes, sure, if you want to get tools like Redgate, you want to get Puppet Labs, you want to use GitHub, whatever, good tools can make the difference, but they're not the key thing that makes it happen. So people will often say, well, Brian, how do I get started today with DevOps? What do we do? Well, what's funny is we're talking about the state of DevOps in 2021, but I'm going to take us back to learning from others from a talk that was delivered in 2009, 10 plus deploys per day. And in this talk, done by John Allsop and Paul Hammond, from a company at the time that was called Flickr, these were some of the major tenets that they delivered in this talk. Automated infrastructure, right? In 2009, that was a huge deal. These folks, though, were having enormous growth, and they knew they could rack up servers and deploy to them and manage all the software by doing a manual process. So they had to build automation. They set up shared version control between dev and ops, which was a big deal. Now, they were doing a lot of stuff on Linux, so there's a lot of shared toolkits between bash scripts, things like Ruby, etc. But fundamentally, they wanted to have this coexistence between these two parts of the organization. One-step build and deploy today is obvious, but back then this was rocket science. But it's still one of the core tenets. Like I said, this is that low-hanging fruit that will often deliver tons of value to your organization immediately. Feature flags and branches. Oh my God, again, I still run into organizations that don't do this correctly or don't do it at all. And shared metrics, knowing how the application is doing, going back to that fast feedback loop, having dashboards, having telemetry from your applications. All this stuff is critical, and it was critical to them in 2009. But look at the last one, communication. The human aspect is the key linchpin to this. It's also what makes their talk interesting is you got these two guys working together to drive their engineering org forward. The talk's still available. Last I looked up on GitHub. That short link will take it to you. On YouTube. 10 plus deploys per day. Dev and Ops cooperation at Flickr. John Allsop and Paul Hammond. Excellent talk. Again, it's a little dated in some ways, but in other ways, it's still the go-to foundational talk on what you want for DevOps. Now, we're going to shift gears here, right? I'm going to pause for a second, breathe, everybody, we're all good. And go from the conceptual over to the more tactical, right? Where we might want to pick a tool. We might want to pick a tool chain. Now, I'm going to talk about GitHub. And if you don't know, I'm a little worried because GitHub is the #1 developer community on the planet. The numbers are staggering. It's the home to the most important open source projects on the planet. These are the current stats I got from GitHub the last couple of weeks. 50 million plus developers, over 100 million private and public repos. The numbers are staggering. I mean, it's just amazing how this is this critical piece of digital infrastructure that affects basically everybody on the planet, one way or another, right? Because it's hard to do anything these days without being affected by modern technology and software engineering systems. Now, when we talk about open source versus inner source, right, we're just making this distinction that open source, made freely available, might have some interesting licenses, but usually it's possible to modify it and redistribute it. Inner source is taking that culture of open source, but bringing it to your enterprise, sharing, building a culture where people can share across horizontal boundaries between different silos, right? Once again, a theme like DevOps, breaking down those barriers. And one of the great things is GitHub is optimized for both. Now, GitHub has a lot of different products and SKUs and things. And the key thing to understand is I'm going to focus on GitHub Cloud, which doesn't require any installation. It's just there. You just have to sign up. But understand there are different versions available that you can get both in the cloud with things like advanced security, or you can even have it hosted inside your organization, either in a self-host mode or in a private cloud setup. One of the things I love about GitHub is I can do a ton of stuff, excuse me, right in my browser. Naturally, you're going to need a free GitHub account to get started. And when you look at the rich set of features that GitHub offers, a huge amount, if not almost all the features are available for free if you use them for open source projects. So the bottom line, the way that GitHub gives back is they say, look, we'll be this hub and we're going to give back to the community. If you give back, we'll give back. We'll enable you with state-of-the-art tools and technology to deliver value to the greater good. On the other hand, if you need to do it for a private source, intellectual property or that next big thing where you're going to make your gazillion dollars, pounds, euros, whatever, you can pay for those services and you can do it for inner source. When we think about GitHub, it has a notion of you'll see accounts, teams, organizations, and enterprise. I'm just going to do stuff as an individual user. We're not going to get into that today. Now, a big thing that we need to remind people of is Git versus GitHub. So Git is free open source distributed version control technology. It was created by Linus Torvalds. He gave it out to the open source community, and it really has taken over as the version control technology to use. You can use Git all by itself and never talk to another human or server, but just have local version control. At the same time, it supports a multi-master style of replication that allows you to have multiple copies across the globe. The problem with that was, there is this notion where people want to come together and synchronize when the changes come in. And that's where GitHub really made their name. GitHub is a company that is now a subsidiary of Microsoft that provides hosting software and version control using Git. And what they've done is they provide backend services, they do backups, they help you provide security. They also provide a nice, easy-to-use web interface, as well as additional features like advanced security on top of this core free infrastructure. Again, they use something that's free, they give back a lot that's free as well. So when we talk about it, that's one distinction to be aware of. Because, for example, there's Atlassian. They have a product called Bitbucket. It supports Git. Microsoft has Azure DevOps. Azure DevOps lets you use version control using their original built-in Team Foundation version control, which is centralized version control. But it also has rich support for Git repos. And so the key to understand is all these things use Git, but then they provide additional value-add services through their hosting and server environments. Now, when I do demos, here's some of the local tools I use. Naturally, you're going to want to have the Git client installed. Another thing is PoshGit and OhMyPosh. Both of these are add-on tools for primarily PowerShell. However, the OhMyPosh folks have now made their stuff work cross-platform, so it works inside Bash as well as ZSH. The bottom line is it makes your command prompt nicer. So you guys might see that if I do a demo. If you're using GitHub, GitHub has a GUI product called GitHub Desktop that you can use. Or if you're like me and like to use Visual Studio, there is a GitHub extension that runs right inside the Team Explorer pane. You can live the lifestyle you want to lead. If you're a command line junkie, party on. On the other hand, if you like GUIs, you're going to have lots of choices there, as well as there's third-party tools. That's one of the great things about this open source aspect of Git is that we have all sorts of tools to meet just about anybody's needs when it comes to working with this distributed version control technology. But when we look at GitHub in and of itself, it's more than just version control. Yes, we have repos, but we also have the ability to track issues in context with the repo. And this is different from the notion of projects. The idea with projects is often we're thinking about the vision. What are we going to build? Whereas issues are more tactical about how do we get code moved from one line to another? How do we share code with our team? How do we identify bugs, things we need to fix, those type of things? And pull requests are one of the things that really stands out in the way that GitHub made this easy, was providing a simple web interface to allow you to take code from one developer, but have it validated before it gets merged into the rest of the main team's flow. I'm just going to check. Marcus, were you trying to interrupt me because I was going too fast or something? No, fantastic. Okay. So I'm almost done. We're going to do a couple more slides and then we're going to do some demos. So, and I want to address an elephant in the room that I haven't talked about yet as well. GitHub Actions is a fairly new piece of technology that GitHub has brought to bear in the last year and a half. Actually, we're going on almost 2 years now total. The whole idea is that GitHub Actions provides a workflow engine for GitHub. It's amazing their growth. I just got these numbers from GitHub this week. Over 125 million jobs per month. It is the #1 overall CI tool on GitHub, and there's over 7,000 actions in the GitHub marketplace. Just amazing. If you can automate it, you can probably automate it with GitHub Actions. And the thing is, someone probably already did. In fact, some of the first demos were people doing just oddball things like ordering pizza from a GitHub action. I mean, it's just wild and crazy. When we think about what GitHub Actions provides you, a fully integrated experience inside GitHub to respond to any GitHub event. Now, I'm focusing kind of on this narrow band area with DevOps, and to me, a big thing is the CI/CD approach. The idea that I can commit code, push it, to main or branch, and have that kick off some kind of validation in the form of a build. And then beyond that, it might go out and do things like deploy the application for me. And the key thing is they want to support any platform with any language with any cloud. So whether that's Linux, Mac OS, or Windows and containers, they support it. They support matrix builds where I can build Windows, Mac, and Linux all at the same time. Full streaming and searchable logs, built-in secret store. They say easy to write, easy to share. I'm not a huge fan of the core experience today where I have to write YAML. YAML stands for yet another markup language, or YAML ain't markup language. Call it what you will, but anything that's white space sensitive is something that's just going to annoy an old timer like me. So take that with a grain of salt. But at the end of the day, you can automate any workflow. They'll give you lots of starter templates that you can use. And then simple pay-as-you-go pricing. It's free with there's some free minutes included with every plan. If you do open source, guess what? It's free for public repositories. And of course, you can get a certain amount of minutes to start, and then they give you more minutes based upon the plan you're on, and then you can buy extra minutes. They're doing lots of work around both their cloud-hosted runners, as well as you can run your own hardware with self-hosted runners. And ultimately, you can use Actions for build automation and deployment. which when we talk DevOps in the generic sense, we talk continuous integration and continuous deployment. Continuous integration is this concept that when you're working on code with a team, you're going to need at some point bring your changes and their changes together. And it's this bringing together that we call integration. And a theme with continuous integration is integrate early, integrate often. Work on small batch sizes, get it committed, get it integrated, and move forward. Right? So we want to have this constant flow of changes from developers being brought together. And the continuous deployment is the mechanics of taking something from a successful CI pipeline and then taking it to that next step and getting it out to a shared dev environment, test, UAT, and yes, once you hit a certain maturity with your development process and your DevOps lifecycle, is going straight to production, right? And one of the things that happens is you start making these micro changes and going all the way to production. It turns out that finding the needle in the haystack is much easier when there's one commit that went into production as opposed to 30 days of commits. Now, a key aspect when we talk about build automation is it's not F5. Now, F5 is a biased statement in that I use Visual Studio, and F5 is the experience where you run the application. And for a lot of developers, they say, hey, it worked on my machine, ship it. When we think about what build automation really is, it's about collecting, assembling, validating, and auditing all the things that go into the process of building an application. The idea is that we want to answer those tough questions. Do the bits create a product? Are we on schedule? Is the product of high quality? Ultimately, build automation's value is making it trivial to take the pulse of your project or product. So we think about a basic build automation workflow is, well, you need something to build. You can use GitHub Actions to be able to find your code. You need to define the workflow, and then you need a runner that supports your tasks. As I mentioned, Windows, Mac OS, and Linux are all supported out of the box. All right. So at this point, I've jibber-jabbered quite a bit. We're going to do some demos. So we're going to go over to GitHub, and we're going to have a little fun. So let me jump out of here. And we'll connect. Okay. So as I mentioned, the first thing is you need a GitHub identity. So as you can see, I am Brian Randell. So if you don't have one, go to GitHub and sign up. It's free. The central point of working for GitHub for most people is going to start at this notion of a repository. And I can create a new repository, and we'll call this SOD. Let's see, today is the 31st. Oh, SOD is available. Wow, SOD. All right. Now, I'm going to start this privately, mostly so I can do things without being totally harassed, and then I can make it public when we're done. Now, when you go to initialize your repository, you'll notice there's a couple checkboxes here. Number one, add a README. Every repo should have a README that shows up on the homepage of your repo and lets people see what's going on. The second thing is what's called a git ignore file. Now, a git ignore file basically tells the Git client what files I don't want to commit by default. Things like binary files, things like OBJ files from compilers, or anything else that doesn't belong in the repo. In particular, you want to avoid things like secrets and text files with passwords in it and that kind of stuff. Now you'll notice that when you go to add it, it says, what template do you want to use? And so if you start typing here, let's see, let's try, how about Eclipse? How about if I do Java? Oh, look, I can do, if I do Java. There's ActionScript. Let's see if there's no B's. C, C, C++, C make could, oh my goodness, C is a magic word, right? That's a very popular thing. Well, I'm going to use Visual Studio, so I'm going to pick that from the list, and that knows what files I don't want. Understand that git ignore files can be nested. You can, have different files excluded by different project types. And one of the decisions you have to make when you're using repos is, are you looking for a large, what is often referred to as mono repo? versus lots of micro or component-based repos. There's no 100% right answer, but it definitely is something that's worth discussing among your team when you think about setting things up. Choosing a license can be critical if you're going to consider making it open source. I'll do MIT. It's going to set my default branch to main, and then you'll notice there's option to integrate with Azure pipelines and Azure boards. This is a feature of the GitHub Marketplace that you can install tools into your GitHub account and your repos that provide additional value. But I'm just going to take the built-in stuff and say create repository. All right, so now you'll see that I've got my repository. There's the 3 files that I set up. And now, like any good developer, I don't want to do any planning. I want to get straight to writing code. If I did want to do project management, I have a couple ways to do it. Number one, I could do projects up here. And I could say, hey, let's create a project to track my work. There's a lot of things it could do for you there. On the other hand, I could also just start with issues. I can come over here and say, this is something I want to work on. So I can do something like that. This is Markdown support, so I can make it bold. And I can say submit the new issue. And now I've got this new work issue. You can come over here and you can add things like labels. We can say that this is a good first issue for people to work on because we want to get this done. I can assign myself to the issue. And that brings up another thing naturally. As a private repo, no one else can see this because this is in my account. But I can come over to settings, and what I could do is manage access. And I got to enter my password. 2 seconds. Got to go to my password manager. And we'll get this. And do that. Whoops. Sorry, my password manager decided to log me in, but that's not going to do me much good on another machine. 2 seconds. There we go. Got to have a good long password. And we're going to confirm. Okay. And so you can come over here and invite a collaborator. So I could invite Octobrian, which is my alter ego. And so now if I were to log in as Octobrian, I can then join and be a collaborator as well. So now though, we go back to the code, and I've done some very quick basics to get started. What I want to do now is get some code written because that's what I like to do. And you notice there's a drop down here, and I can come over here and clone this repo. Now, as I mentioned, I like to use PowerShell is one of the things I do. And I've got a directory already set up for doing this. And so VC stands for version control. If you're curious, I'm pulling down from GitHub and I'm accessing my Brian Randell excuse me, account. So I'll do a git clone, paste that in, and it's going to clone that repo. And so now I can change into it. And another thing you'll see is that my prompt is telling me I'm on the main branch. So one of the great things about Git is it makes it very easy to work with branches, makes it easy to create temporary branches to work by yourselves. And on the other hand, it's a great way to do some work. And then if you do decide to share it, you can then take that branch, push it up, and then open a pull request to get someone to share and review with you. So if I do an ls and take a look at this directory, you'll see those same 3 files. So now I could do something like make a directory called src. And so I've got that. And now I'll fire up Visual Studio. And we'll create a new web project. Okay, so I can say File, New Project. And we'll give Visual Studio a second to update. We'll do an ASP Core Model View Controller, and we'll call this SOD Web App. and we'll do 2021 just in case someone else is using that. Now the path, VC, GitHub, Ryan, Randell, SOD, SRC. We'll use long-term support 3.1 since 5.0 is not available. Plus, I might want to deploy it to Azure. We'll make this publicly available. HTTPS, though, is always a good thing, and we'll hit create. All right, so let's build it. Let's run it. Got to make sure it works. Nothing worse than checking in code that doesn't compile and run. Should never do that to your teammates. Okay, great. It's a tour de force of simple web application development. So now if I come over here in Solution Explorer, we can see that I have my web app, and I apologize. I normally have Zoom it running, and it's not running. So let me do that. Let's try that again. Whee! Okay, so here's my solution. And as you notice, when we open this up in File Explorer, what we're going to see is there's a bunch of folders like obj and bin. But the beauty of the gitignore file is those files won't be pushed up into GitHub. It'll only be interesting things like my JavaScript libraries, my fav icon, and the other bits and bobs that are related to my application. Now, if we come over here to Team Explorer, this is the current window that allows Visual Studio to provide a graphical view around what you're doing with Git, TFVC, or other version control providers. Now, if I come out to PowerShell, one of the things you'll see is, for some reason, my fonts have screwed up my glyphs. But what we're seeing is that, hey, if we go in here, there's some files that you might want to work with. So if I do a git status, it's going to say, hey, I'm not seeing anything in here, but if we go into there and start checking, right, it's saying, hey, there's files we don't know about. So we can come over here and also do this graphically. So normally I could just do a git add, but I could also connect to GitHub. So if we take a look here, I did SOD. If I double click on it, and since it has my credentials already because I've logged into GitHub before, all of a sudden more of the tiles light up. If I come over here to changes, it'll say, hey, we see there's a bunch of changed files in there. What do you want to do with them? Well, I'd like to stage them, please. And when you stage files, and now you'll see that it went to a plus 52, it's saying these are the files I'd like to commit into my repository. Committing is the process of taking changes and committing them to the local repository. Now, you can choose to do a large batch of all the changes, or you can do piecemeal. You can unstage things, for example, to exclude them. Regardless, I'm going to commit all of these, but only the files that aren't being ignored. So this is good. And of course, you want a message. And we generally try to have a short message that fits easily in the viewer. And then you can write more details after adding a character turn. So we'll say add baseline ASP.NET Core 3.1 web app with MVC. It's using C# and hasn't been changed from the template. Now, another thing I can do is I can do a hash sign in here, and this can link to my GitHub issue if I'd like to. So if I hit commit staged, what will happen is my change is taken care of here, but now notice there is this up arrow with 1. It's telling me that there's one commit that is only done locally that I haven't shared with my remote location. In fact, one of the things you can do is ask a repo, and it'll tell you where its remotes are. Now, the key thing to understand about this is you can have multiple remotes with your repo. But one of the things that's happened with GitHub, bucket, Azure DevOps, is this codification of having some central location where teams come up and sync, as opposed to a kind of hub and spoke model where people sync up all around themselves dynamically. So by having that verification, we can see that. So I've done the commit, and if I wanted to go back to the GUI, I can come over here to sync, and it says, hey, there's one outgoing. But the thing you always should do before you push is you should check, hey, did someone else beat me to it? Now, I'm the only one working here, so no one did. But you'd want to fetch and pull and bring in the changes from them, make sure there's no conflicts, and then push. And it's possible you might have to do a merge. This is one of the reasons teams will often like developers to work individually on their own branch and then commit via the branch and then do a pull request. So the merge is dealt with up on the server. But once again, you can do lots of different workflows. And right now I'm just doing this by myself, so I don't have to go to the trouble if I didn't want to have a branch. So we'll click push, and then we'll go back up to GitHub and take a look at my repository. So if I refresh here, you'll now see I have my SRC folder. There's my web app. There's my code. And you'll see I even get nice color coding inside the GitHub browser. And if you hadn't seen it a few months back, they added dark mode support. So I even get my dark mode support, which makes me happy. So at this point, I've done the very basics of things, right? I have my issue. You'll notice that I added the label, I self-decided, then notice that Brian Randell added a commit that referenced this issue. So this provides me with a little bit of traceability between what I'm doing and what I changed. Now, this type of workflow, if you pause right here, is perfect for a single developer. You just do your thing. But you probably will want to embrace branching as well, okay? But I want to move along and show a little DevOps magic. We're going to do a little bit of actions. So we're going to go forward and set up an action to both build and deploy this. Now, you'll note that when you get started with actions, you can say, oh, I want to deploy a Node.js app, or I want to do Google Cloud or Terraform. There's all sorts of choices here. And if I come up, I can set up a workflow by myself as well if I don't find what I'm looking for. I'm doing .NET. Let's see if we find something for that. No love for .NET today. Too sad for me. I'm just kidding. So I'm going to set up a workflow. And when you set up the workflow, it's going to give you a new file. Now, they default to the name main.yaml. You can call it something else. Like I can call it cicd.yaml. And then you'll note that there is a bunch of text here. This text can be overwhelming at first. So what I'm going to do here is, to save us a little time, I'm going to do some clipboard inheritance. But before I do, I need to think about where it's going to go. Now, a common thing that people want to do is they want to take their code and get it deployed into some environment. One of the things that's really taken over the IT side of the house, right, that more ops side of DevOps, is this notion of infrastructure as code. Whereas I can describe what I want and hand it off to some piece of orchestration software that knows how to build what I need. This is, where is the PS-Git integration showing the directory and branch in the prompt? Real quick, the branch is right there. It's called main. So here's the directory I'm in, the physical directory. And then there's the branch I'm on, and there's the changes. And by the way, when I hit return, it goes back to the triple equals to show that it is pushed. Oh, as I mentioned in the slide on local tools, I've installed something called Oh My Posh. So if we go back a few slides. Right. Whoa, we got a little excited there. Local tools. So I'm using PoshGit and Oh My Posh. And there's like I said, there's a link. Scott Hanselman's done some great blog posts. But Oh My Posh, if you just find their new website, the install is like 2 lines of PowerShell. It's great. Okay. All right, so we're going to leave this tab open. And as I was saying, this notion of infrastructure as code, the idea that I can feed some kind of code file, and this may be a JSON file, maybe an XML file, it might be some YAML file, to some orchestrator. I'm going to use Azure and call the Azure Resource Manager that accepts ARM templates, and ARM templates are what we call are a JSON file format. So there's a couple things we need to do here. I'm going to need the ARM template, and I'm going to need some access to Azure. Oh, this is getting crazy. So let's go over to my browser over here. I'm already logged into one of my Azure subscriptions. And one of the great things about Azure is it makes it easy to work with from the command line as well as from the GUI. There's even a command line built into the web browser, which is pretty awesome. Now, one of the things you often run into when you're doing things is you want to make sure that you have the right account. So I can come over here and get a list of my accounts. So this is the one I'm in. This becomes important when you're working with with multiple Azure subscriptions. So you want to make sure you're in the right one and know which one you're working with. So that's pretty straightforward for me. Now, one of the things you need to do, and I'm going to bring this over and show you what it looks like, but then I'm going to do it off screen because I'm going to end up with some secret stuff that, no offense, I don't want on the internet. So let me open up God's Editor Visual Notepad, and we'll paste this. Oops, it didn't take it. Sorry, let me copy in between screens. Okay, that did not work at all either. I'm having a day with the clipboard. It hates me. Okay, well, what I'm going to do here is try one more time. There it is. Okay, so let's break this down. This is the command line that you can use to define what is called a service principal in Azure. The bottom line is you don't have to get wound up on this too much. It's just I want my pipeline, my GitHub action, to be able to go over to my Azure subscription. I want to say, knock, knock, who's there? It's a service principal who. I'll provide some information in the form of an SDK authorization JSON document. It will then say, oh, okay, based upon the privileges you've defined, you can do something. Now, the command line I'm setting up here is making a contributor to my entire subscription. This is fairly powerful. If I wanted to, I could restrict it to, say, just a resource group, which is a scoping mechanism inside Azure. Once again, the details are not super critical. So what I might want to do is something like this, where I say, GH demo March 31, and then I'll replace the subscription item here with my real subscription, and I'll make this one line of text. So I'm just going to pop over to another machine, because as I said, this is going to create a secret that I need to use, but I don't want to share with the rest of the world in YouTube because that would compromise my Azure account. Okay, so and by the way, the command I could enter right here in the shell that you see on the screen. So 2 seconds. Everybody take a mental break for 30 seconds and go to the proverbial mental beach. I am going to get another window and paste in my lovely information and grab my secret. Now, I'll show you roughly what the secret format or the file looks like without the secret in it in just a second. So we're going to go over to Azure. And once again, the reason I did that list on the accounts is I need that GUID. And the other thing is I'm validating my login with MFA. So I have to approve this with my phone. Got to keep good security. There you go. All right. Okay, so I'm going to pop open the Cloud Shell. I'm going to close this one right here because I won't need it. Okay. So let's grab my juicy command line option. We'll paste that in. Almost there. Okay. And we're going to do an extra edit. Okay, take out that piece of data. All right, I'm about to run the magic command. It's creating it. And that scope, by the way, is the switch that lets you limit it if you want to limit it to a particular resource group. All right, so I've got this beautiful piece of JSON that I'm going to save off to my password manager. And then I'm going to edit it out a bit. And show you what this SDK format looks like. So it's basically just a JSON blob. And now I'll go back to my screen over here. Okay, I'm having trouble cutting and pasting for some reason. Oh, I hate you. Well, it looks like this. It's just JSON, and it's got a set of name value pairs. So like client ID, and of course this is in quotes to be valid JSON. And then we do colon, and then the value goes here. And then you'll have the client secret. Those are the two big ones in conjunction with your tenant and your subscription. And so it's this type of blob that I'm going to put into GitHub, and I'm going to come back. I'm going to lose this. That's not a big deal. We'll go to settings. And what I'm going to do in my other browser is you'll notice that there's an option here for secrets. And I can put a secret inside my repository that's only available to the runtime. In fact, when you put it in, it's one way. Once I put it in, I couldn't even show it to you if I wanted to. So let me do that on my other screen. And we'll go to github.com/Brian Randell. And we'll go to my new repository. And of course, because I have security on this machine, it's asking me for MFA. Again, you all want to do your security keys. I'm talking to a VM, so normally on my regular machine, I would use a YubiKey, which I highly recommend you look into. Okay, so I'm basically doing exactly what's on the screen. I'm just going into settings. I'm going into the secrets. I'm clicking the button New Repository Secret, and if you do it, you'll see it opens up an item like that. And so you can see the convention is this thing underscore whatever. I'm creating one, as you'll see, called Azure Creds. And in doing so, I'm going to paste the real JSON document into that secret store. And this will allow the GitHub runners and any of my workflows the ability to talk to that subscription on my behalf. Okay, so now if I come out of here for a second and go back into secrets, you will see where it is. So notice you can update it or remove it, but I can't view it. There's nothing to see. Now this will then be available to my action. Now, I mentioned one other thing that we need to do. I would like to be able to talk to excuse me, I would like to be able to talk to Azure and tell it, hey, I want to deploy a web application, so please give me the right infrastructure I need. Now, the cool thing is for Azure, I don't need a lot. I really only need to have access to what's called an Azure App Service environment, which is a web app and an app service. And the app service is basically the VM that's going to run my web server application. And so what we need to do then is make sure that I have a JSON file. And so we're going to take one I already have, and we're going to come over to my repo, and we'll come over into this folder, and we'll see if I can do some clipboard inheritance here. Oh, yeah, printing, that's going to get me really far. Okay, let's... I apologize. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it on my other machine, and then you'll be able to see it here. So let's just jump out of here for a second, and I'll go to my other tab. And almost there. And so I'm going into that folder, and I'm adding a new file. I'm going to paste it in. And I'm having trouble here. Okay. Well, I have the power. I can figure this out. I'm not a complete idiot. Just I play one on TV sometimes. 2 seconds. I definitely have found a bug in the beauty that is RDP. I think we discussed bugs earlier today. I think this is, I'm going to blame this all on Marcus because we had trouble getting started today. I hope you're okay with that, Marcus. All right. There we go. Okay, so we're going to create this new file. I'm going to call it azure.json. It can be called anything you want, and it definitely doesn't have to be anything. It could be in the same project. It could be in its own project. It could be a separate repo. Just you have to have a way to do this. Okay. Oh, it helps if you give it a name. You guys will appreciate that the save button wasn't lighting up. Okay. I'm about to be back on your screen and everybody will be happy again. Okay, so let's refresh this. Sorry about that, folks. So, there's the file, and now I've got to rename it. That's hilarious. So let's come over here, get pull. Oh, you gotta love it when I can't even rename a file today. I'll have to use the GUI. No command line love for me. Okay, sometimes the command line can be your friend. Okay, back to the browser. Let's refresh this page. Oh, it's like, hey, you lost your file. That's because I renamed it. Yay! So we go back in there. Okay, let's talk about this file really quick. Let's make the font a little bigger. Okay, it's simply a JSON file that describes a few things we want. Now, a couple of things at once. It's going to say, I need a plan. Now, I'm going to have to change this because I've already got one called this. So we're going to rename the GH demo plan X. And this is basically a plan that says how much you're willing to pay for a certain amount of RAM, certain amount of disk space, etc. So we're going to replace those names in here. So we just change that, and then the rest of it will feed in. So you notice the description says web application name. So I can just come back in here, and we'll just replace GH plan X with GH plan XYZ. And we'll just come down here to line 28. Now, Visual Studio has tools to create ARM templates. Microsoft maintains a repo up on GitHub with tons of samples. You can get wild and crazy, like deploy entire Kubernetes clusters, all sorts of good stuff. So we'll come over here and we'll save the change. The update changed plan name, and we'll commit the changes. All right, at this point, we're now ready to come in and define our actions workflow. So we'll come over here, set up the workflow, and what I might have to do is connect to my other machine since I'm having trouble with the clipboard. So what we'll do here is, because I don't want you guys to be annoyed too much at me, net use R. And I'll just commit it there. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is grab a little piece of text and save it in there, and we'll just do some tweaks using, say, Visual Studio Code or something. Would be fine. Almost there. Okay, so what we're going to do here is if I come and go to Visual Studio Code, I'm going to open a file on my Q drive, on my temp dev folder, and we'll see. Oh, because it's R. It helps if you get the right drive letter, Brian. There it is. Okay. No, I don't need the GitHub Docker extension to talk to me. Let's talk through what's going to happen here. So this is the breakdown of what's going on. We can come over here and say, okay, the name of my YAML workflow. On push to main or on a pull request to main, I want you to run. I then want to expose 3 environment variables to my workflow. So we're going to call this GitHub Live MR31 for the web app name. We'll call the resource group A at the top, so it'll sort. And I'm going to deploy to the West US. Then we come down here. Because I'm running .NET Core, I can just run it on the Ubuntu runner. The benefit to this is that they're very fast and they're cheaper than some of the Windows and Mac ones. Then I come through, and this is where you start to think about what your actions workflow looks like. You have a set of steps. And so these steps say, hey, I need to use another action to make my workflow work. And this goes back to that number of 7,000 actions that are out there. So there's different actions. Some are built in by GitHub, which the actions checkout one, of course, is, to other ones like Azure Login, which comes from the Azure team. So you can build your own actions and publish them yourself. So here I'm setting up .NET Core, and I'm setting the .NET version. So if we come over here and I do .NET info, let's see what my latest version of, let's see, we're doing 3.1407. So we're going to do 3.1407. And then here I need to do a restore, optionally a test, and a publish. So I need to fix this to match my solution. So if we come over to Visual Studio, I can take that solution name and do a little clipboard inheritance replacement, right? So we'll do some Control V there. Oh, you know what? Maybe since I'm in code, I can do that and replace that one, that one, that one, and that one. Now, I don't have any tests in here. I'm a bad monkey, so I'm going to take that out for now. But I am going to build it. I am going to output the configuration to a folder called output. And then notice I'm going to use this login task to log into Azure with those saved credentials. So I'm going to pull those down. And then I'm going to say run this command, AZ group create. As I mentioned, a resource group is just a thing in Azure to let you logically group resources together. And it's going to provide a name and location based upon these variables that I defined earlier up here. Okay. Then it's going to do a deployment where it's going to go into my group name and it's going to use the folder that's actually down here. And it's going to locate that azure.json file, passing in the name of the web app it wants to use. That JSON file is going to provide the information about the web server I want. I set an S1, which provides just under 2 gigs of memory, 50 or 200 gigs of disk space. It's enough information or enough stuff for my workspace. You can go smaller or you can go bigger. Once I've done that, this will run every time, but understand the next time it runs, it's just a validation step. So while it might take a few minutes the first time, it'll take only a couple 30 to 40 seconds the second time around, because as long as no one's changed it. And then finally, it does the last step, which is deploys my changes and logs out. So what we're going to do is copy this to the clipboard. We're going to go back over to our web browser. In fact, we can do this actually in Visual Studio. Let's open this up here. Oh, that's the JSON file. Don't do it, Brian. This is I'm not thinking. I actually caught myself. We want to go edit our actions workflow. So we come over here, and we're just going to Control A, Control V that in. Hopefully I didn't screw anything up. I'm going to change the name to be CI-CD. And then you'll notice over here on the marketplace, they talk about different actions you can use. They provide you with documentation. And they do try to provide you with a decent editing experience. There are tools you can load into Visual Studio Code to give you things like IntelliSense. But the bottom line is you do have to get the YAML all aligned. Knock on wood, I've done that. So we're going to come over here and do a start commit. I created the file and did some in clipboard surgery. And I'm going to commit this straight to main. So at this point, if we come out here to my repo, you'll see I now have a new folder called .github/workflows. And so if we go inside that folder, we'll see there's the YAML file that I created. So now if we go to actions, you can see that I have one there. And notice it's running because I committed to my repo and it picked that up and it's actually running that workflow. Now, I'm going to leave this running and jump back to the slides for a second because this will take a couple minutes to do the entire Azure piece. But let me just prove a point. If we go over to Azure and go look at my resource groups, there is no AGH1 in my list. Okay, so this will be dynamically done on the fly for me as it goes and runs my build. And you can see it's going through, doing a setup for .NET Core, installing my dependencies. And let's just give it one more step to that. Oh, I screwed something up. Process complete with exit code 0. That's always lovely. Let's see what we got here. File does not exist. How is that possible? Did I screw up the name? It looks like I possibly did. So let's go to Actions. Okay, we're going to click the pencil here, so it's always good to show how we can do this. Oh, there's an extra folder in the way, is there not? Yep, there is. Go out here to PowerShell, or actually Windows Explorer will do. Oh, it's the dreaded extra folder path from Visual Studio. Yep, okay. And I'm sure there are people across the world screaming at me, you moron, you need an extra path. And in fact, that other one's going to fail too because it's a little different. So let's go find out where the CS proj is. It is in SOD web. Well, actually, the solution's 1 level deep. Yes, and the project is 2 levels deep. So we got a double. That's pretty ugly. And it's not .web, it's there. Okay. And hopefully there was great singing and rejoicing as Brian fixed. Yes, they could, I think, provide a little more love in looking things up in the repo. But okay. It's always good to blame someone else. No, I'm going to be accountable. I'm the moron. I did not get that set up. It's the problem with live demos, right? Okay, so let this start. We'll come back and check in a second. And I want to talk about something else. So we had this slide when I talked about local tools. Someone said, where did you get that command line, etc. And I love having my tools my way. I love having fast hardware. I love the great experience. But, you know, working with different projects at work and possibly different languages if you're a polyglot, and having all the tools configured can sometimes be a real hassle. And it really can be an impediment to successful delivery. Also, when you're concerned about security and, you know, the days we used to travel, losing laptops and stuff like that, there's a lot to consider. So if I fast forward a bit past my demo slide, you know, GitHub and Microsoft have been thinking a lot about how to make this better. And so my one more thing moment, to steal from Steve Jobs at Apple, is GitHub has something called Code Spaces, which is really awesome. And Code Spaces is basically your instant development environment in the cloud. It allows you to do it from your browser or from Visual Studio Code locally with the Code Spaces plugin installed. And you can use it with any public or private repository owned by you. You can have more than one. They allow you to have 2 during the beta if you're on the preview. For now, it's free, and at general availability, they'll be billing at least an hourly, if not per minute. Now, the key thing to understand about this stuff is hot. They've been working on it now for, good golly, over a year, I think. And so they're working real hard to make this a fantastic first level experience. Right now, the best experience is in a Chrome-based browser like Google Chrome and Microsoft Edge. If you don't have access but you want it, you can sign up and look at the preview today. I am lucky enough to have access. So once I check my build process here, oh, it blew up. Yeah, that doesn't matter. I know it should work. It provisioned. So let's just go refresh. AGH live. Oh, you booger. It didn't like something. Oh, error, no such file. I got the path wrong there. Okay. So let me just fix this one. I apologize. And then I'll show you code spaces while it's running again. So we'll come in here. We will look at the file. And we will edit it. And we'll go fix that path because it's down double deep with our friends, the CS proj file. Let's make sure I'm not crazy. Yes, I am. Well, you folks know it's real because I am just breaking things all over the place today. Okay. Let's find my JSON file right there. Get rid of the extra slash. Get rid of the extra dot. There we go. Third time is a charm, he says. Okay, commit changes. So we got past the build. It'll keep going. And we know that at least it was able to create the resource groups. So the last bit should be easy peasy. So I'm going to open up a new tab here. And here's my code right here. But, I have to make sure that I have .NET Core installed. I had to install an editor and get all the tools going. Had to make sure I had the Get client. What if I could just go here and say open with code space and say create new code space? Well, that's what you're going to be able to do. And what's going to happen is it's going to go set up a container for me with a base set of information in it. But you can provide customized files that install exactly the tools and technology you want inside yours. So you'll see it's got Visual Studio Code loaded inside here. And then notice, hey, you're running C#. So let's get the C# tools installed for you. Again, if you know you're going to need certain tools, you can tell it all the things you want in here. You can install your custom extensions. You can sync up to your account. But as we go and look at this and expand the source folder, yes, keep doing the C# extension. So it's doing a bit of installs. Notice it's adding this customized folder for my launch and task settings inside my repo. So when I commit this, it will keep those changes and it won't have to redo that over and over again. In fact, you see it's got some pending changes. But now if we go in here, we can look at the code. So you saw that we were running just a bog standard sample before. If we take a look at the index, we can add a message. Hello to everyone who was kind enough to attend today. It's nice to know that people want to learn about DevOps. That makes me happy, so I can save those changes. If we come look over here at the controllers, I've got a home controller. We can see that we got privacy and some other stuff. I wonder can I actually write code? Look at that. And we can do something like a view bag. Oh, wow. I love it. IntelliSense. This is great. I wonder, could I do something? Oh, no, that'd be too awesome. Breakpoints? Let's try this out. So literally, I'm going to click the button over here and click run. Right? So notice I'm in my browser, but notice that the terminal is spewing out output. It's going to start compiling my application. And it says, oh, hey, I'm going to open your application. Okay, do it. Connecting to the forwarded port. But we got an error. So this happens occasionally. So we're going to stop this. And we're going to come over here again and give it another whack. Sometimes the browser will pop up, we'll get it. Oh, you're being a bugger. I did this earlier this morning. All right, what I'm going to do here is hang on for a second. Did I mention it's still in preview? All right, before I commit, I want to, oh, my build failed again. I am having the worst time. Okay, so it failed on the JSON file. The resource ghdemoplanx is not defined in the demo. I missed a typo in the JSON file. Should not do clipboard inheritance. Okay, so let's come over here, and if I do a git fetch or git pull, I can open that JSON file. Actually, that one I can do in Visual Studio because it's already here. I missed an XYZ there. There's one there. XYZ, XYZ. Okay, I'm getting a little short on time. I've been going a long time, almost there. So by pushing this, we'll kick it off automatically. And what I'm going to do is, while this runs, I'm going to do a Julia Child and show you debugging, hopefully, by going to another one of my repos. So we're going to leave this code space open. I'm going to go to a new tab, go to GitHub Code Spaces, and this will show me all the code spaces I have. And we're going to go to my reading time one that I already have. You'll notice there's an option to open in Visual Studio Code. There was a preview where they were using Visual Studio, but Microsoft announced that they're currently not going to continue working on that. So if you've been trying that approach, it's going to expire on the 12th. Okay, this is a similar web app, similar config. Notice it just fired right up. There's all my files. There's even a breakpoint I saved from my last demo. And so let's just see if we can get this one to fire up, and let me show you the wonder that is debugging. Now, while we wait for this to actually spin up, let me talk about the elephant in the room. So Brian, Microsoft owns GitHub, but they have this great product called Azure DevOps. What should I do? If you don't have a DevOps practice yet and you're starting from scratch, you should start with GitHub. GitHub is the future. Microsoft spent $7 billion. It's real simple. Okay? Now, pause, and we'll come back and talk about what you do if you're on Azure DevOps. Hey, hello, fans of InnerSource. There's my app. It's running. And if I go to privacy, notice the tab's going to light up with a red dot. And there I am debugging. I've got local variables. This is the cat's meow when it works in my browser. So they've got a little work to do with the debugging for fresh code spaces, but it does work amazingly well. It's really neat stuff. Let's go look at my CI/CD. Hey, it actually worked. Oh my goodness. So let's go over to Azure. Let's refresh the screen. Let me click on the link. This is worldwide, available to everyone right now. And if we click the link, we will see the website that I deployed. And so just to prove a point while I start doing the wrap up on Azure DevOps, let me go over here. Let me do a poll, make sure nothing's missed. I'm going to do a quick change to the home page since my code space didn't work. So we'll go over to the view, because I always like proving that, yes, this is live, not Memorex, if you're old enough to remember that. Okay, we'll do that. Come back up here. Okay, so I'm going to push that. We go back up to Actions. Do a quick refresh. It's going to go. And so, the first time it took a little longer because it had to create that web server, had to create the website. But this last time, it should be a little bit quicker. If we go back out, let's look at the summary times. So this one took 1 minute and 55 seconds. This one should take just under a minute or just over a minute. So you're using Azure DevOps. Should you rush to GitHub? No. Azure DevOps is going nowhere. The biggest issue with Azure DevOps today versus GitHub is where the energy is. The number of users in GitHub, over 50 million. Azure DevOps is below that. I don't know if they're doing the talking points on the numbers, but it's less, okay, by a significant margin. Microsoft understands that they have customers. They're not going anywhere. I can tell you, as someone who does work for Microsoft, I do work for internal teams. I use Azure DevOps every day for them. Every team I work with uses Azure DevOps. It's not going anywhere. However, as I mentioned, Microsoft uses GitHub for open source. Microsoft will long-term look to GitHub as to be the future of the innovation. Microsoft still supports the Visual Basic runtime. Azure DevOps will be around for a long, long time to go, but their center of innovation is around GitHub. So what you want to do is, number one, you want to get off TFVC if you're on that on Azure DevOps for sure. No question about it. Git is the future when it comes to version control. You want to look to embrace good DevOps practices, and then prepare yourself for the eventual possible move to GitHub, or you could probably limp along on Azure DevOps. And I say limp along, they're going to maintain it. It's going to get bug fixes. It will get some new features, but it's not going to get near the love that GitHub is going to be. The ramp up on features that they're doing with GitHub is just phenomenal. And it's, on one hand, it's a little sad for some people because we get used to things and change is hard. But GitHub is going to bring a lot of goodness for us. I've been super happy all the time I've spent with Azure DevOps, but I'm looking at the future as well. So let's just go see if this is finished yet. It's still running. I'm going to do a refresh. It says it's still in progress. Let's go. Oh, it says it's done. So let's just refresh the page. And then I'll wrap up and take any questions for people who are still here and let Marcus do his. Look at that. It's live and painful, but it can be so worth it. That's it. My last slide is thank you. And of course, if you want to get a hold of me, you can find me on the internet at Brian Randell on Twitter is the easiest and best way to find me. I occasionally podcast at devops.fm. I occasionally blog, and I'm definitely available for hire in general troublemaker. So stay in touch. Thank you very much, Marcus. Thanks for having me. I hope it was interesting, and I'm happy to answer questions or do whatever you want at this point. I'll stop talking.
Well, thank you very much, Brian. This was excellent. DevOps, definitely something that I recommend people look into. Obviously, GitHub was the one thing we focused on, but as Brian said, Azure still there for you, will be there for a long time to come. But if you start something new, we think GitHub's the way to go, and that's why we wanted to show that to you today. Also, just on a little bit of a personal note, Brian's experience there was much like I often see in DevOps. A little bit hard to get all the pieces moving in the right direction, but once you do, you really get the benefit out of it. Now we're already running a little late. Just a few more announcements here that are probably of interest to you. Again, Jim already pointed this out to you. We have a survey. We'd really appreciate if you can fill it out. This helps us set the tone, set the topic for future State of .NET events. So if you can help us out with that, that's great. Again, we do offer a free hour of consulting. So if you wonder, how does this apply to me personally? It's nice overall, but my situation is a little different. Contact us. This is a popular thing since we've started doing this. So first come, first serve, but definitely available to you. No strings attached, just an hour of free advice. A few other things really quick. If you're a Code Magazine reader, which hopefully you are by now, you are, after all, getting a free subscription out of this if you want it. Check out our Code mobile app. It's now been around for, I think, 8 or 9 months, getting popular. So take a look at that as well. And if you have friends that are Visual Studio subscriber, Dev subscribers, all the Microsoft stuff, even the free stuff, they also qualify for a free Code Magazine subscription. So take a look at that as well. And then we already have our next State of .NET on the calendar. It's going to be State of Azure. So we've done this before, more than once actually, but it's been a while. So we'll take stock again where we are with the Microsoft Cloud. That's our April 28th presentation. Okay. And we also have another webinars scheduled, which we're now starting to do a lot. We're going into this 2-a-month rotation. So that's going to be very interesting as well. Another DevOps related talk. So take a look at that. And I also want to thank our sponsor one more time. We've now been doing these events for almost a year. Takes a lot of effort. It's fun to do, but it's a lot of effort. And so we are happy that we have some companies that support us in that. So you could do us a big favor if you also check them out. We are only trying to partner with companies that we think are worth partnering with. So take a look at what they are doing, and you'll get some more information about that. And that brings us to the end. Thank you very much. Again, I want to point out, contact us if you have any questions. I always tell people, consider us a resource. We're more than happy to answer your questions. We're not the kind of company that'll send you a bill right away. Brian got his information up on an earlier slide. We'll send you all these slide decks. Our information is on an earlier slide as well. So contact us. If you don't know how to contact Brian, contact us. We'll make sure that we'll connect you with him as well. And just consider us a free resource. And with that, we're way over time, but I think it was good information. So thank you all very much, and hope to see you again next month. Thank you.